Everybody. As you just heard, we are going to be recording the meeting. So if you prefer not to be part of a recorded meeting, now would be the time to wave and say, I'll see you next time. I guess I would ask everyone at this point to put themselves on mute. And the best way to watch this program will be to put it on speaker view. So if you go up into the corner, instead of, you have the choice between gallery view and speaker view. And that will, when Kelsey and Henry speak, they'll come into the full screen. And then the other thing I'd like to mention is that we will be taking questions in the chat box, and we'll be kind of monitoring those as we go along and kind of trying to feed them in at the appropriate part of the program. So with that, I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight. I'm Louise Spencer. I am with Kent Street Coalition, and it's great to see everybody, even if only virtually. So we are really fortunate tonight to have a dynamic duo joining us. So Kelsey and Henry Klementowicz, and they are here bringing their extraordinary knowledge and perspectives to share with us. So they are both attorneys and with lots of experience and insights about voting, and particularly the voting landscape here in New Hampshire. They both come at it from different organizations and from different perspectives. And I think that will give us a much more complete picture of what we're really looking at with voting as we head into first the primary and then into the general election. So Kelsey is the director of the New Hampshire, is it the coordinated campaign or the NHDP voter protection project? Which is just amazing to have it already up and running on the ground with staffing. Kelsey has some amazing staff that work with her. A number of folks are volunteering for the hotline, and it's just fantastic in this year, particularly to have Kelsey here already, going so strongly on the ground with that. And then Henry is a staff attorney at the ACLU New Hampshire, with lots of voting litigation under his belt, and just really a go-to person in New Hampshire around voting issues. So with that, I would like to welcome the both of you, and I will turn the program over to Kelsey and to Henry.
Thank you so much, Louise, and thank you all so much for having us. This is a particular pleasure for me because I never get to do events with Henry because of his nonpartisan status. That means that he does not usually get to come in to my backyard office. He's usually up in that room there in his ACLU office. So this is a real treat for me to get to have date night with Kent Street.
Yeah, well, it's also nice to be on a panel with someone in person again, even if it's with the only person you're ever allowed to be around. So just like quick disclaimer, as Kelsey said, ACLU of New Hampshire is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization that does not endorse or oppose political candidates. So if you think you hear me say something that is opposing or supporting a political candidate, that's a mistake. We do talk about some issues that we ask people to consider when they vote, and we'll get into that after the end. Kelsey and I were trying to figure out how we were going to do this presentation because we both end up giving basically the same presentation all the time, just with slightly different slides. And I haven't seen hers and she hasn't seen mine. We decided to go with Kelsey's presentation, but like as she set it up, I noticed that it's like way longer than mine. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes. We'll we'll see what happens. Louise, do you mind giving us screen sharing?
Yeah, I just am realizing I need to do that. So
Awesome.
Thank you. Well, this is also a moment for me to just thank all of you all for the work that you've been doing for so long. It has been an absolute pleasure to come into the voting space with leaders like Louise and so many of you. When I do our little section about the hotline, I will send it to Mary and Claudia, who are just killing it over there. And Kiri is jumping in as a hotline ball too, which is really exciting. And we will
we
get.
also have my friend Alan Chemetz, who did
Oh,
the
yes.
other night. So
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, thank you all so much. So as Louise said, we're Kelsey and Henry, and I do just want to also mention that Henry is the reason why I am doing this job. He is the reason why I know about voting rights. I've just been a voting rights fan for many a year when I was at the Public Defender's Office for 8 years, and hearing him talk about all the amazing work he's done. And I got to be a volunteer for him when he was a fellow with the Voter Protection Program. So just really, really excited to be able to do this together. So with this presentation, what we want to go through is really making sure that everyone is super familiar with the step-by-step voting process. As leaders in this space, we want all of us to be able to talk really, really comfortably about all of the steps for absentee voting. So we'll go through a sort of a step-by-step guide, some tips about how to talk to voters, to strike that balance between giving them information and also making sure that everybody can feel comfortable and confident in these elections, as well as how to find resources, help out with the voter protection efforts. In this case, it's my voter protection team and also the ACLU's amazing efforts that Henry will get into after we finish up my part. So let's jump into sort of an intro. Hen, you want to talk about like voting in New Hampshire normally?
Voting in New Hampshire normally is statistically done in person about 90% of the time. New Hampshire is one of 17 states ordinarily that does not have no excuse absentee voting, which is one of the issues that we're organizing around. And so it has an absentee balloting process that has sort of been loosened over time, but is prescribed by the New Hampshire Constitution. And it has an absentee voter registration process, which in normal times is used even less frequently and is sort of clunky in the best of times and prohibitively hard in the worst.
Great, so Henry talked about most of this, but this year, any voter may vote absentee if they're concerned about COVID-19. So a concern about COVID-19 could mean that you're worried for yourself, worried for members in your family who might be high risk, but it can also be worried that having too many people in the polling place may lead to the spread of COVID-19. So in order to vote absentee, the very first step is to fill out an application. And as Henry mentioned, a lot of voters aren't comfortable with this. It's going to be their first time going through the absentee process.
Right, and so the legislature has said, and the Secretary of State and Attorney General before that any COVID-19 concern is a valid excuse. You don't need to have seen a doctor. You don't need a note. Just sort of your own reasonable thoughts on it are enough.
So let's go to step one. Step one on my presentation is to download your absentee ballot application from voteinnh.org. Henry, what's your step one?
Yeah, so you can also, if you want nonpartisan branded voting rights advice, you can go to our website, which is voteng2020.org. It's like basically the same, but it doesn't say Democratic Party all over it.
So once you get to your application, you're going to fill it out. And you'll see with the graphic on the right that there is a section where you can select COVID-19 as your excuse. So it's highlighting it right now. I am unable to vote in person due to concern for the novel coronavirus. In addition, HB 1266, which was passed, I don't know, days, weeks, months ago, I'm not great with time these days, allows for voters.
July 26, maybe?
I believe you. That sounds right.
Signed by the governor, I think.
See? Yeah. He knows things. And so that will allow you to just with one application request your ballots for both the primary and the general election. So if you were to submit your application now, either in person at your clerk's office or through the mail-in process or by email, you would be able to immediately get your primary ballot, and then you'd be first in line to get your ballot for the general election. So this is a zoom in on the COVID box. So I am unable to vote in person due to concern for the novel coronavirus. You'll also see there the other traditional excuses, which is absence.
Yeah, so just to be clear,
Oh, yeah.
like the box that Kelsey's slide is telling you to check is only the box that you should check if you're concerned about COVID-19. If you can't appear in public on election day because of observance of a religious commitment, for example, you should choose that one. This is the new form that exists just for the September and November elections. And that's the box most people are going to be checking because that's the reason most people are going to be voting absentee.
Yeah. For me this year, I'm not voting absentee because of COVID. I'm voting absentee because I will be working on election day. So once you filled out the form, you're going to return it to your clerk's office.
Right. That's true.
You can return it by mail, email, fax, or in person. We are all doing a little bit of arguing over electronic signatures right now. Hopefully we will have a resolution on that. We are very hopeful that there is a way to submit the absentee ballot application without necessitating a printer, a scanner, or a stamp.
Some people think that's governed by the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act, but those people are not the Secretary of State or the Attorney General.
That's right. Other people think it's governed by the Secretary of State's interpretation of the word facsimile, which just means a copy of it. So a copy of my signature should suffice. Regardless, once you've submitted your application by email, fax, drop-off, or mail, you have the opportunity to track your absentee ballot.
So yeah, this tool you can find on the Secretary of State's new website. You can also find it on our website, votenh2020.org.
And on our website.
Yeah, I think it's a decent tool. I don't, given how busy everyone's going to be with absentee ballots, my guess is like just learning what I've learned from like tracking my Amazon packages over the course of the pandemic. I think it's going to be slow to update, but that still is sort of better than nothing.
Yeah, so for that, so when you would go to this website, you would you'd select your town or city and type in your first, last, date of birth and do the CAPTCHA. So, which is the typing in the letters in there. And so you can see that here I have submitted my information. And so you can see up top my voter ID number, my first and last. They spelled our name right. Good job, whoever input my my handwriting.
Did you redact your own date of birth?
I did.
Okay.
I know, identity theft. I trust all of you, but those other Democrats who I present to, just kidding.
No radical transparency from Kelsey.
Actually, I think on the next slide you do see it. So regardless, you can see in here that I have requested my ballot for the state primary election. So you can see that it says ballot requested and the date of 7/7/20 is there. So that's actually the date, not that I sent it, but that's the date that my clerk input my request form into the computer. Because what's happening back in the clerk's office is they get your absentee ballot and they'll type it into ElectionNet. So they're typing in Kelsey Klementowicz, they'll find my registration and they will connect it. I actually have my ballot now because it was mailed out about 2 weeks later. And so if we were to go to the site now, you would be able to see the date that the ballot was mailed to me. I have not yet returned it because I find it very handy for these presentations. I may pull it out today. So the other helpful thing on this.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah,
with a couple
please.
questions? Because somebody wants to know, let's see who this was asking. Gina wanted to know that can you request your absentee ballots but change your mind and decide to vote in person? And what happens, Sally asked, what happens if I submitted my form before my request for the primary ballot before they changed to include both? Do I need to submit another form?
Those are perfect questions. You want it?
Yes and yes. If you request an absentee ballot and you never mail it back, that's fine. It's not going to come in. You're not going to be checked off on the checklist as having voted, so you're entitled to go in and vote in person. And in fact, even if you submit your absentee ballot, if you get there early enough, you can legally try to beat your ballot back and vote in person anyways, which you would really only want to do, I think, if you've changed your mind about who you're going to vote for. The other question was, what happens if you submitted your request form before they changed the law? The same thing that would happen if you submit your request form and you don't check off the box for both elections. They're only going to send you the absentee ballot for the election you've selected, so you'll just have to do it again.
Yep. And you can go to this tracker site to see. So here, if you submitted your form and wanted to select both elections and it only shows up with the primary form, that's a flag for you. You should either call your clerk to find out if they got your general election form or fill out another absentee ballot application. And the other thing I do want to note on this website is that there is your clerk information is there, so that if somebody wants to know where their clerks is, I'll note that this website is not always right. I believe that the ACLU has their own clerk search.
We ran like spiders over the internet that pulled out all those tools, which will tell you your clerk's information.
And we're doing it the same also. Our clerk's information search tool will be up very, very shortly, probably in the next couple of days. The other thing I want to note is that with this tool and with the tools on both of our websites, you can see what ward you are in. Your ward is important because when you're filling out your absentee request form and your affidavit envelope, which we'll get to, it's going to ask you for your ward.
Right. And you only have a ward if you live in cities. I don't know if you're all in Concord, but if you live in a town, you probably don't have a ward. This is also a good time to mention that you probably all remember this, but New Hampshire does not have standard polling hours. So in addition to looking up where your polling place is, you can also look up your polling hours. Oh, yeah, you did forget to redact your date of birth. Look away, everyone. Avert your eyes from Kelsey's date of birth.
Oh, no. All right, so step 5, this is the fun one, right? This is where you check your mail for your ballot and then you get to vote. So here are the 3 things that are gonna come in your absentee ballot package. And Hen, you wanna start on this? These are the 3 things. We're gonna go to how you do them in just a sec.
Yeah, so there's a ballot and then there's 2 envelopes. And basically the key point is that you're gonna wanna fill out your ballot. This is a general election envelope. And then you're going to put your ballot in the affidavit envelope. And then super important, you're going to fill out the affidavit envelope. And then you're going to put that in the mailing envelope and send it in with the stamp.
Yeah, so when you get your absentee ballot, you want to pull it out and you want to make sure you have all 3 of those things in it, right? So you want to make sure that you have the big mailing envelope, the one on the bottom there, your smaller affidavit envelope, and your ballot. Those are the 3 main points. There'll also be instructions in there. And so as Henry mentioned, after you vote, you want to fold up your ballot and put it inside of this middle affidavit envelope. And then that goes inside of your return envelope. On the affidavit envelope, This is really important. You go ahead.
Yeah, this is the main reason that ballots get discarded. Absentee ballots don't count in New Hampshire is because people don't fill out the affidavit. You got to do it. Your signature is not going to be compared to anything, but you have to sign it. You have to put in your town or your city and ward.
Yep. So that's on that top right side of the envelope. So it's right here is what you're seeing on the screen. And something that is a little bit frustrating is that these are old envelopes that the Secretary of State's office has not decided to change, which means they do not have COVID on them. They say absence because of religious observance or physical disability. Regardless, if your reason for voting absentee is COVID-19, you need to sign in that top right section. Legally, COVID-19 concerns count as a disability. That is how COVID-19 passed constitutional muster in the Secretary of State's eyes. So you just need to sign this right side. The Secretary of State's office has indicated that it is fine to write in COVID-19 there, but you want to sign that top right box with your signature. Other thing is that there's a section to print your name. You do want to make sure that the name that you are signing there is the same name that you are registered under. For example, Henry's mom. Why is this relevant?
Because some people are registered under not their legal name. It depends if you have incongruent documentation. I don't know how she gets away with that.
Yeah,
but
the example I give is that Cindy Rosenwald has Lucinda Rosenwald on her birth certificate and Cindy Rosenwald on her driver's license. She gave me permission to say that in these presentations.
So this is a good time to talk about a little bit about voting with incongruent documents. So this is something that happens, people change their names over time. People who are trans or non-binary may have documentation that is not always consistent with themselves. And the most important thing to think about, if you're someone who's changed your name and you're wondering whether you need to re-register and you don't necessarily have documents that line up, is that you have to vote under your current legal name. So if you change your name, you have to re-register, but even if you have documents that are different, or you have the new non-binary gender marker on your driver's license, that's still fine. There are absolutely ways to do that. Gender and or having a picture on your driver's license that looks like you or presents with the same gender is not a qualification for voting. So that shouldn't get in the way.
So what does that mean? Does that mean that if my driver's license has male pronouns, but I use female pronouns, or I have some document that says male and some that says female, they need to accept my vote?
Yeah. So this is, I don't know if you get in, I've never seen this presentation that we're giving, so I don't know if you get into this at all. Okay. Yeah, Louise.
No, go ahead. And then I have a couple questions.
Yeah, okay. So to be a registered voter in New Hampshire, there are 4 qualifications.
Oh, this part I do get into. Do you want to pause on that until we talk about registration? It's totally up to you.
Yeah, no, let's do it. Let's pause on it.
Cool. Okay, we jump into absentee first because that tends to be what people want to know about. Louise, are these absentee process questions, or are these
absentee process questions? So,
going with that.
So there's a question. So Deb Butler said that a city worker in Concord said it was fine to sign either side of the envelope. My understanding is you're supposed to sign the side that describes what your reason is, but would your affidavit get rejected if you signed in the wrong place, or you signed too many times, or?
No.
It's not my, I don't think so, but I would say out of an abundance of caution, we want to make this as easy on our elections officials as possible and not give anybody an excuse to reject it. So
yeah, when they process the ballots, they look to make sure that they're signed, but they don't like track you down and say, like, they don't do any confirmation of the affidavits. So your ballot will be counted. Just sort of logistically what happens is they take all the envelopes out of the mailing envelopes. Then they go through and they pull one of these affidavit envelopes out and they say, has it been appropriately signed? Yes, okay, great. And then they look and they say, has this person already voted? Are they registered? Have they been checked off? If they're a registered voter who hasn't cast a ballot, they say, great. They cut open the ballot and then they put it aside and then eventually they feed them all through the machine. So that happens without any verification of the affidavit itself. The reason that we tell people to sign the absence because of disability or religious observance is because technically an affidavit is a document signed under oath. And so you have to be truthful when you fill it out. And the guidance that we've gotten from the Secretary of State is voters concerned about COVID-19. That's what the Secretary of State has said. Now, is it like possible to be absent from your city or town? You are absent from the polling place because you can't go because of COVID? I think probably, yeah. I think that there's like very little chance that anything negative would happen, but to be consistent with the guidance that the state has given, that's why we tell people to select.
So you should read it and then sign where the side which most describes what your reason is.
Yeah.
And then, so I know these are old envelopes, as you mentioned, but I believe that some hard work was done to try to get the Secretary of State to try to help voters, and possibly by putting a sticker or a sticky note. Henry, could you tell us any more about that?
Yeah, I'm expecting that for the general election, a new round of mailing will go out with like sticky notes on the affidavit envelopes. I don't exactly know what it's going to say. It'll probably say something like, sign here for COVID, or physical disability includes COVID-19. The Secretary of State, for whatever reason, thinks that they're not allowed to change the form on the envelope from what's prescribed by statute, even though in about 6 different ways they have. It's a whole thing. not necessarily worth getting into, but that's why the form doesn't say COVID, is that when the legislature passed the law, they updated all the other forms. They didn't explicitly update the affidavit envelope. So probably we're going to get sticky notes by the November election.
They've actually said that they're going to do those shortly, and that the language is going to say you should sign under disability if your concern is for the novel coronavirus. There are also mailers that the Secretary of State's office has sent to the printers that should be going out to every household this week that also explicitly says that you should sign under the disability section for COVID-19.
And just one more question before we move on. So we hear back that some folks are concerned because it's not specifically on the affidavit and they don't consider themselves to have a disability, that they're somehow not signing the truth or that they're subjected to voter fraud. So could you just speak to that issue to reassure people that they won't be hunted down by the AG's office for voter fraud?
The first memo that the Attorney General issued back in April 6th or whatever it was, explicitly said that no prosecutions are going to be brought under the misuse of absentee voting process for anybody who has legit concern over COVID-19. So you're not at risk. You know, I can't give anyone specific legal advice, but like, you know how when you watch a TV show and, you know, they're like, you have the right to remain silent when you're being questioned by cops and you have the right to ask for an attorney. And it's like universally good legal advice to say to someone like, never talk to the cops if you're under suspicion or under arrest. Likewise, like I can't imagine a situation in which anyone would ever face any liability for voting absentee in New Hampshire. And if I could, it would basically be people who are going to reopen NH rallies. Like if you don't believe that the coronavirus is real, then probably you're not entitled to vote absentee, but everybody else is.
But also the AGs have said that they will not prosecute anyone under that section if your reason is COVID-19. So they have absolutely said that. And in fact, in the new election procedure manual that came out yesterday, it does say that all voters in New Hampshire may vote because of COVID-19, may vote absentee. So they actually gave the blanket statement that we've been waiting for months.
That's a good example of the Secretary of State stepping on their own messaging.
Well, that's good. That's good reassurance. And I think that's a message that we all want to be getting out to our folks, is that it is okay to check this, even though there's a disconnect. It's okay to sign this. People are not going to get prosecuted. It is okay. So
right.
That's important. And I think voter information.
I absolutely understand the discomfort there, but I think as lawyers we're sort of used to the definitions of words being really different over time, and this word disability is from our Constitution, and so it means what disabled meant back in the day, which means that you sort of didn't have the ability to do a thing because of some sort of a health reason, and not the ADA definition of disability. And so that is what it means here. Disabled means there is some sort of health situation that is preventing you from being able to. And that's the reason we have that. Yeah, Louise?
Yeah, and so the one other question related to this is, you have written in COVID-19, that's more for the voter's comfort, right? So no one has to write COVID-19. You can just sign the affidavit as is, even if your reason is COVID-19.
That's right.
Absolutely. That was just a suggestion that the SOS gave at one of those meetings with local elections officials for anybody who felt uncomfortable.
It's a really weird suggestion, telling people to like write over government forms, but that's what
it's also not a valid basis to reject a ballot. Also, there's no situation where a moderator should be like, I'm not going to accept this ballot because I don't believe in someone's excuse. That is not right. Their place.
And they don't have an ability. There's no way for them to enforce that anyway. Examine it just by the dictates of the calendar.
Right. The only valid reasons for your ballot to not be accepted is if you have not signed it, or if the signature on your affidavit envelope is very clearly the signature of someone else who is not your name, if it's very clearly a name and not your name, or if you're not on the voter rolls.
Right. If you're not a registered voter, they won't count.
Great.
Cool.
That's good clarification. I know we took a little longer on that, but that's one of the sticking points that we often hear from people, so that's really helpful.
Yeah, I'm so glad we went into it. Okay, so we're now back to, we filled out our information. we have our ballot ready, and then we want to go ahead and return it. So I have my ballot is all packaged up, and I have my official mailing envelope. So you're going to want to make sure, if it's going in the mail, that there is a stamp on it. It's one first-class stamp. Do note that it says here the post office will not deliver without postage. This envelope may require additional postage. That's not super accurate. It does require one first-class stamp. The Secretary of State's office has said that it is one first-class stamp. And because it's official election mail, the post office's policy is that they will never return official election mail back to the voter for insufficient postage. So put one first-class stamp on there and say this thing gets very, very wet and it weighs more than the one first-class stamp, they will still deliver it. They'll just charge your town. So one first-class stamp.
And if you're concerned about that, you can return your ballot in person in the envelope to town hall up until the day before the election.
Well,
Absolutely.
we did have a question about that. Someone asked, we had a couple of questions around returning the ballots. One was from Sherry. Can anyone drop it in a drop box at the clerk's office?
No. So the statute prescribes a limited class of people who are licensed delivery agents. And also the Secretary of State has said only manned drop boxes. Is that right?
We go with staff.
Staffed drop boxes, right? I was just thinking that. Only staffed drop boxes or observed drop boxes.
I still don't believe that it's a valid reason to reject any ballot if it is dropped off. And in fact, the Secretary of State's office instructed at least one of our volunteers today that if you had to drop in a drop box, as long as you told the clerk's office that it was in fact your ballot and that you had dropped it off, they would accept it. It is their concern about voter fraud, which we all know is, what's the language? Virtually non-existent?
Yeah, not a real reason. Also, yeah, again, only a limited class of people that's basically family members can drop off someone else's absentee ballot. So,
or specific caregivers,
right.
like if you're in a some sort of assisted living facility.
So, and what is the last, so if you mail it, obviously it has to get there, well, not obviously, maybe you can speak to that. When does the ballot have to get there? And Zib asked specifically, why is it the ballots can be returned up to 5 p.m. on election day in person, and who are they returned to?
Yeah, so
Okay.
if you bring your ballot, if your ballot is brought in person,
To your clerk's office.
to your clerk's office on any day other than the election. On election day, the ballots are to be brought to the polling place. And the cutoff is in statute that says that basically they're supposed to be processed until 5. And so I think what happens is if you mail a ballot and it gets to your town clerk on election day at like 5 o'clock, they're going to leave town hall and bring the last batch over to the polling place. But if you're bringing it in person, or well, you really shouldn't be bringing your own absentee ballot in person on election day.
That's not true.
Okay. There have in the past been suggestions that you should be, either way. If say I'm bringing Kelsey's ballot to, her absentee ballot to go in person on election day, I'm bringing it to the polling place. If I'm bringing it the day before, I'm bringing it to City Hall.
As you can hear, there is a significant disagreement, or there has been significant disagreement about bringing your absentee ballots to the poll. That is something that HB 1266 specifically allowed, so that any voter who, due to extenuating circumstances, were not able to return their ballot earlier due to COVID-19, may return their ballot at their polling place on election day. And actually the new election procedure manual lays out that it is best practice for every polling place to have a designated person or place where you can drop off your absentee ballot outside, or even to apply for and complete your absentee ballot outside, to decrease the number of people who have to go into the polling place. So that's all now in the new election procedure manual, which is hot off the presses.
Great. Good to know. Thank you.
So I guess here I'll jump into some of our resources for absentee voting. This actually is an old version of it, my apologies, but we have all of the steps that are in this presentation we have on our one pager, which we're very happy for anyone and everyone to distribute. In addition, as we mentioned, we have our website. So this is our website, voteinnh.org. You can see that there are the steps to vote absentee on there, and well, and a lot more, as well as the registration information. And then on the right, you can see a section of our FAQs, which is linked to a whole bunch of different categories, so that if, for example, you have a question about student voting or proof for registering, that is all up and available on our FAQs. And all of the answers to those questions have been reviewed by at least 3 election lawyers, so you can rely on those answers. Oh, good, I do have this, okay. And then, you know, my favorite resource is our voter assistance hotline. Hey, one of our hotline balls, does anyone want to jump on and talk about it?
I think Mary's here, but
it's my favorite time of the week. It's actually, I have to admit, I was quite nervous the first time or two, but it's really interesting to hear the issues people bring up, and it's very rewarding to be able to help people through the process. And as often happens to me, if you don't know the answer, there's always somebody else that does, and you can say, we'll get back to you. And so it's great. It's very well supported. I've been meaning to send you an email, Kelsey, and say how incredibly well organized it is. They send out every week. They tell you exactly what you need to upload on your computer. They tell you, here's this resource, here's that. It's fabulous.
Yeah, it's a throwback to my amazing team. Elizabeth and Nicole are just incredible. But so our hotline is staffed with mostly attorneys and some sort of super qualified non-attorneys who are there to answer questions for voters. We're running it from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, and from noon to 6 on Saturday. And as we get closer to the election, we will expand our hours. So any voter can and should call our hotline with questions or to report issues. We sort of like to send our voters first to the FAQs. So if it's an easily answered question, they can get it there and they can have it in writing. Otherwise, to call over to the hotline. You are helping us if you send voters to the hotline when they're having issues, so that we can really keep track of what's happening around the state. You know, we've heard about issues that are happening in various towns that we're able to really address to make sure that all voters have access by means of someone reporting it to the hotline. So never feel bad about sending people to our hotline. We love it. It really, really helps. And it helps us to think about the questions and the issues that voters are having, so that we can help with our voter education materials to make sure that all voters have the info they need.
Before we move on, a couple of things. One of our calls to action later in our program, when we get into how Kent Street is going to be, what the work we're going to be focusing on as we move into the elections. One of our calls to action is for any attorneys or law students who are able to volunteer for the hotline to do so. And then Zib Carell, who is an election, she's a supervisor of the checklist in Concord. She has a question still about that 5 o'clock drop-off time.
Hi, Kelsey. So what I'm seeing and hearing from multiple sources is this whole issue of the 5 o'clock, which implies that the ballot can be somehow delivered to some place at 5. And I've seen this before. I can't tell you exactly where, whether it was on a presentation by the Secretary of State or whatever. What concerns me is, as a poll worker, we always process our ballots sometime during the course of the day. And I'm not sure I've ever seen ballots come in at that hour. My concern is, and while it may be perfectly legitimate, people are looking at the details so closely because they're so afraid that their ballot won't be counted, that I have had friends say, you know, I'm going to get my ballot and I'm going to get it ready, and I may walk it in. So the question becomes, walk it in where? Or I may hold it and then I'll walk in. So then they're not using it. Instead, they're coming to vote. So I'm very concerned about this notion of delivering your ballot somewhere on the actual election day.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. This is not meant to be a good option. This is a last minute, if you have no other options option.
Unfortunately, though, it's circulating as a calendar point, and that's what some people are hearing.
Yeah, well, I think that that's something that sort of we all have the opportunity to work on, right? We can all change the way that we talk about this to say, get it in as early as possible. Right. I mean, frankly, we have early processing sessions now this year to help out our elections officials. And we all want to get our ballots in before that so that election day can go as smoothly as possible.
Yeah, just we are also recommending to everyone, do this whole process as early as you can. We heard today, I think it was today, the president said that he didn't want to give the $25 billion assistance to the post office because of his concerns about mail-in voting. If you're concerned about the post office and its ability to mail in ballots, what you should be doing is either bring your ballot in person, although not on election day, or mailing it in much earlier. Because if you think that, you know, New Hampshire is going to go from 10% absentee voting to 50% absentee voting, that means there's going to be like 300,000 statistical new absentee votes this year. And wouldn't it be great if those ballots were delivered over the course of a month instead of 3 days? That would make it a lot easier for the post office. So our advice to everyone is do the process early. And to Zib's point, the whole reason, well, voting is an intensely personal thing, and your voting plan is intensely personal. But one of the reasons that we're encouraging people to vote absentee is because there are those who can't, right? There are people who are not English language proficient. There are people who require assistance from an election worker to cast a ballot. There are people who don't have reliable mail service. That's less a problem in New Hampshire than out west on some indigenous lands. But there are people who need to vote in person. And what we're encouraging people to do is think about, how can I make it safer for people who need to vote in person to do so? And the best way to do that is to vote absentee. And if you're returning your absentee ballot to the election polling place on election day, well, it's legal to do that. You're like kind of defeating the whole purpose of thinning out the crowds. So that's why we're encouraging people, as Zib says, you know, you can, it's not a good plan. Your best plan is to vote early.
Yeah. The reason why I think the only reason why I think it's important is that if someone has trouble and they don't have the opportunity, you know, say the mail is delayed or they have to work long hours and don't have the opportunity to get it in ahead of time, it really is that extenuating circumstances. They'll have the option to drop off their absentee ballot instead of having to wait in line and go into the polling place, so that people who, you know, might have pre-existing conditions will have an option that is not necessarily being inside an enclosed space for hours. That is really the purpose of that and the goal. But I think now we're spending a lot of time on sort of a small exemption to the general rule, which, as Zib points out, is to get it in ASAP. And, you know, I think registration, as we're coming into this section of the presentation, is one of the biggest concern that we have about Election Day, and one of the many areas that we really need to do a lot of work to encourage folks to register early as soon as possible in order to decrease lines on Election Day. So, Hen, who can register?
We'll hold on some of the questions to allow. I'm not sure how many sides you guys need to. We want to make sure you have full time to get through the program. So maybe I'll try to hold back some on the questions, and we'll let you move through the program. But people still feel free to put your questions in the chat.
So registering to vote. Look, New Hampshire has one of the best things about voting in New Hampshire is that we have same-day registration, which cures a lot of evils. It helps us, you know, it makes exact match less of a problem. It makes voter caging less of a problem. It makes, you know, people moving and confusion or issues like that less of a problem. in every election except for this one, because you can't really do election day registration by mail. And so what this means is that you basically, for the first time, people are going to have to start thinking a little bit more carefully about how they register. So the first thing I like to tell people is look up your registration status. It's super easy. You can do it on our website. You can probably do it on Kelsey's website. You can do it on the Secretary of State's website, although for whatever reason, the link says look up your party. But look up your registration. And if you haven't changed your name or moved to a different town or ward, you're good. Who can register to vote in New Hampshire? There are 3 qualifications. You have to be a U.S. citizen, 18 years old, and you have to live in New Hampshire. You should do this ASAP. It's a complicated process. New Hampshire only allows government actors to register voters because New Hampshire is exempt from the motor voter law. So either you register to vote at the polls on election day, you register to vote in person at town hall prior to the blackout window of 6 to 13 days, or you register by mail.
Yep, and you can also register your supervisor at the checklist meetings. And I know many supervisors at the checklist are planning on holding multiple sessions this year, ideally in outdoor spaces, so that people can come in and register in person earlier. These are really, really great. We're encouraging every town and city to host as many absentee voting and registration events as possible. And, you know, certainly we as a party, and I imagine you all as Kent Street, and I'm assuming probably the ACLU are going to be pushing, no, not the ACLU, great, okay. And I know some of the, like the youth activists will be pushing their voters to really try to get them to those early events. Because as Henry mentioned on election day, like it's a long process. And I know we've all seen lines that can be up to 2 or 3 hours long in, you know, rare circumstances. And that's without COVID. You can imagine the process of trying to do the forms and passing back and forth proof through masks, some distance apart, trying to understand each other, trying to explain a form from a distance away. It's gonna, you know, we have to expect that it's going to take longer and that those lines are gonna be really, really long, unless we can really motivate a lot of the new voters to register early. So here's our 1, 2, 3 on how to do that. So to register in person, step 1, call your clerk's office. Different clerk's offices are doing different things. So we recommend that everyone call over and you can make an appointment or find their open hours to go in. Number 2?
Register to vote.
What proof do you need, Henry?
So you don't need any proof. Nobody in New Hampshire is going to be turned away from voting, from registering in person, important point, due to lack of documentation. There are 4 things you have to prove. Age, citizenship, and domicile are the 3 qualifications, plus your identity, right? The categories of documents that you can use to prove all of those things are pretty broad, but if you don't have documentation on any of them, you can sign an affidavit or swear to the back of the registration form, and nobody should ever be turned away because they don't have documents.
Never, never, never. And as we mentioned before, you can also get your absentee ballot at the same time. There is an absentee registration process. It is a little bit confusing and cumbersome. And so we're not generally recommending that anyone use it unless they need to. And if they do need to call the hotline and we'll make sure that we can walk you through it.
Yeah, so there's some information on how to do this on our website. I'll just talk about it a little bit. You request the registration forms from the town or city clerk. They'll mail them to you. There are 3 things that are probably going to get in the way of this for a lot of people. That's you'll need to be able to have physical proof of your identity and your domicile. You'll need—
What does physical proof mean?
Like a driver's license. You'll need to be able to copy that, and you'll need a witness. There was a pending lawsuit that was filed 2 days ago, I think, or yesterday, I don't know. To block that, I don't know if that's going to happen. You should assume that that lawsuit is not going to be blocking those requirements in time. The Secretary of State and Attorney General have created a new process for people who want to register by mail but don't have access to the proof documents, the witness, or a photocopier, called requesting an accommodation, which, you know, you call or you email your town clerk and you say, hey, I don't have a witness, and they will either suggest a Zoom appointment or FaceTime or meeting in a COVID-safe appointment. I don't know how it's going to work. It's going to be town by town, but that is an option that you have. Yeah.
Cool.
So this is the part of the presentation that I'm going to skip.
That sounds great. He doesn't exist anymore. No, just kidding. All right, so talking about voting, this is how we talk about it.
I'll come back for the nonpartisan part. I'll just go over here.
Oh, because the word Democrat is in this. That's fair. In fairness, we're actually encouraging kind of everyone to vote absentee, to make it so that everyone has space to vote on election day. And as Henry mentioned, largely because some people need to vote in person. So, yep, so vote from home by requesting your absentee ballot to make it so that no one in your community has to choose between your health and your right to vote. Well, I'll do this part too without Henry, I guess. But so our general do's and don'ts around voting is that people have a lot of anxiety about voting. You know, we talk to voters all day who are just sort of like, oh, what if? And we find that the most helpful way to talk to voters is to tell them what we do know, what is definitive. And so that's answering questions about how to vote from the materials that we have and the information that is solid. Here, we're answering a lot of sort of in the weeds questions that we wouldn't normally do for a broader public, but you guys are activists and you care about this stuff and you guys know this stuff. But generally, this is what we tell our organizers, anyone who's volunteering, is if you're talking to a voter and they ask you a question, if you don't have the information handy, I don't know, but I can connect you to help, right? Send people to the hotline, send people to the website, our website, ACLU's website. Even the Secretary of State's office just put up some FAQs yesterday that were totally fine. And then just bring the conversation back to the importance of voting from home. You know, and one of the reasons is that we never want to guess. We never want to tell a voter, we being anyone, you know, what they should or shouldn't do. We as a hotline never give legal advice or tell someone what they should do. What we do is we offer information that'll help voters to make their own decisions on what to do. And I know the ACLU does the same thing. Okay, Hen, come on back.
Great. Now that the part about how to talk to voters and campaign is done, I'm back.
Cool, so we want to talk about how to help. And so let's go through this a little bit. So this, who recognizes this photo? You guys recognize the photo? This was Milwaukee in April. Oh, Mary, you recognize it because I've used this photo before in presentations. And so in April, Wisconsin had the first election since COVID became the new reality in the US. And that caused extremely long lines, as well as a huge amount of voter confusion. And that is what all of our work is here to make sure doesn't happen here. So, you know, as John Lewis says, too many people struggled, suffered, and died to make it possible for every American to exercise their right to vote. Hen, why is this so important this time?
I mean, it's always important, but, you know, it's important to remember the fight for civil rights in the context of history and what it is, which is basically as long as we've had a republic, we've had people trying to prevent other people from voting on the basis of race and on the basis of gender. You know, this is the 100-year anniversary of the 19th Amendment.
That's what I was getting
For
at.
the first 160 years, I don't know, I'm not doing math this evening, of the republic, women were just not allowed to vote. And it was much longer for people of color. It wasn't really until the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that we started to see meaningful federal legislation on it. So the voting is a very important right. It has historically been weaponized against gender and language and racial minorities. And, you know, some people continue to do that.
Yeah.
Sadly.
I mean, that's something we've seen in New Hampshire in a lot of ways. You've worked on 2 lawsuits that were about this.
Yeah.
Seeking to expand voting rights and stop voter suppression on it. COVID is its own method of voter suppression. The areas like we saw in Wisconsin that have the longest lines and cause the most disenfranchisement are in more heavily populated communities, or in more urban communities, are in communities that have fewer resources, which means they're communities also which are disproportionately Black and other minorities. And so, I've lost my screen. And so we really want to make sure that, as Henry said, we are doing everything we possibly can to make voting in person safe and available for those communities who need to vote in person. Statistically, the group who uses absentee processes the least during COVID-19 are Black Americans, because they have seen their ballots rejected for every reason under the sun. And so we have many communities who say, no, I'm going to vote in person to make sure my vote counts, and it's understandable. And so we who have the privilege of having our votes counted by absentee, who can access this process, who can check our, check your ballot, make sure that it's submitted, to please use that process so that those with disabilities, those with language barriers, and those who have been historically discriminated against will have access on election day, and not those long lines like we saw in Wisconsin. So something else that contributes to voter suppression, whether through intentional efforts or non-intentional efforts, is misinformation and disinformation. You want to talk about this?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it recently with the mailing that one of the political parties sent out. If you see that, you can let us know. You can call the Attorney General. You can call the Secretary of State. I think what we're seeing this year is a lot of the airplane is being built as it's being flown. And so even with the best of intentions, a lot of people are putting out things that are wrong or incomplete. So it's important to be as accurate as you can, especially about the really big ticket things like who's allowed to vote absentee, what day is the election, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so if you see bad info out there, I would ask that you contact us through our hotline or through our misinformation flag form that I know Louise has shared before. But as Henry mentioned, there are lots of different ways to report this to make sure that it gets addressed and it doesn't get spread. As I mentioned before, our hotline helps us. Oh, this is my favorite. Do you want to talk about poll workers?
Not on your campaign.
Not on my campaign. Great,
Yeah.
This one doesn't have it. Yes, it does.
But you can, I'll say I'm volunteering to be a poll worker this year because I think that it's a good way. The average age of an election official in New Hampshire is super duper old. And
Is that the technical term?
yeah, that's industry term. No, but there are statistical analyses that are done, and we know that poll workers tend to be elderly. And we know that elderly people are more at risk for complications due to the virus. So if you can, I encourage everyone to sign up to be a poll worker. One way to do that is to email your town or city clerk or your moderator and say, hey, I'm taking the day off. I'm really interested in protecting democracy. I'm super robust and have the immune system of an ox, and I'm gonna wear, a mask and a face shield or whatever you give me, and I'm gonna apply, follow social distancing guidelines. And so encourage people to sign up to be election workers. And if you're not gonna do that, we encourage people to vote absentee. And if you are gonna vote absentee, we encourage people to do that early.
Cool.
We have a few hale and hearty folks well into their 70s who feel that they're very comfortable knowing what they know about themselves to go do this. So it's a personal decision everyone makes about, if you feel that it's safe for you or if it's not. So the important message for sure is that there are a good number of people who, for whatever reason, are not going to be able to be poll workers this year, and we need to really find people to step up and do that. We're going to be talking about that a little bit. That's another one of our action items.
Yeah, well, before we move on to questions, I just want to give a just quick chat about our ACLU voter campaign so I can justify my participation on this presentation with Kelsey, who's terrific, obviously. So I just want to tell you, ACLU has a campaign that we're doing to get people to think about civil rights at the ballot box. You're all at this Zoom right now, which means you're not at Civil Liberties in the corner office, where our political director is, as we speak, interviewing Dan Feltus about what he would do on civil liberties issues. We held this event with Andy Valinsky a little while ago. We've invited the governor. I don't know if that's been scheduled or if it's going to happen, but we're encouraging people to think across 6 issues as they vote. That's privacy rights, racial justice, criminal justice reform, voting rights, trans justice rights, and immigration. And just since you're all here and you're all big voting rights nerds, which will hopefully get Kiri back, me back on her good side, I want you to just know the 4 things that we're asking people to think about or ask political candidates about on the voting rights front in New Hampshire are: do you support making Election Day a state holiday? Do you support making Election Day materials available in other languages other than English? Do you support no excuse absentee voting? And do you support an independent redistricting commission? So we've sent out a candidate questionnaire. Check out our website, acluvoter2020.org, where you'll be able to read all of the candidates' answers. You can go to Facebook Live and watch if you're still undecided on which of the 3 candidates, or I think if he makes the general election ballot, we'll invite Daryl Perry too, perhaps. I'm not sure if that's been finalized, but watch the Facebook Live events to see what the candidates say on these issues. And thanks. That's my plug for ACLU Voter 2020.
No, but you had one other thing. Well, what could employers and other people do to help support their employees or others being poll workers?
Give them a day off.
Yeah, aren't you guys trying to get a national day off?
I said that.
All right, I'm not a good listener.
Holiday.
All right, cool. But also it'd just be really awesome in New Hampshire if, even without the state holiday, for everybody who can, to give people the day off so that everyone can be active.
So that is great. Those are all points that we really need to, for sure, try to get. I really support that platform.
My mentions are blowing up in the chat. I'd like to apologize for that crack I made about election officials, who are like the real heroes. Also, while I'm just telling you about cool things, a movie came out July 31st called The Fight, from the producers of the people who made the documentary Wiener. And it's about 4 ACLU cases that just wrapped up, one on immigration, the census case, one on abortion rights, and one on the trans military ban. It is a super, super cool movie. You can see it at Red River Theaters. I think they probably have a way to watch it online. The movie's called The Fight, and it's awesome.
Great.
So I'm encouraging you to all watch that.
Also, in the deleted scenes, do you know who was sort of featured?
There may be a web extra that I
Why did they delete you?
I don't know. That's a whole bigger conversation.
He looks very serious.
Because I said something about the poll workers being too old, and they were like,
Right, they said we can't have that.
Yeah.
Just one more question, 1 or 2 more questions. Some people have reached out to their town clerks to volunteer. Suzanne asked, should she be waiting to hear back from the NHDP or from the town clerk directly?
Will you ping me offline on that?
Okay, yep. Okay, so Suzanne, we'll connect you with Kelsey on that.
And let me just say a very weird thing about that is that the New Hampshire Elections Code has a scheme wherein the political parties appoint election workers, which I think is insane, but that's it is what it is. So Kelsey and the Republicans, I don't know, maybe were recruiting people to be poll workers. You can also just apply directly with your local election officials depending on their needs, and they can find other roles too.
Yeah,
Well,
more recruiting.
We'll connect Suzanne to somebody.
Perfect.
And then can you say a few words about college students? So Melissa was asking about, a 20-year-old who is in school living over in New York, where do they need to vote? Looked on the facts, wasn't sure that it was explained clearly, and was hoping that you could address it. And maybe point her in the direction of where it is. Do they vote New York? Do they vote New Hampshire? And what concerns do we have about college students? And maybe we'll make that the last question for the evening and then wrap up. So.
Yeah, so I'm going to Kelsey's put up their one pager, which I'll let her talk about, but I just want to say, people have been fighting about college students being part of the state's political community in New Hampshire since at least the 70s with the Neuberger versus Peterson decision out of federal court. And really since then, Dartmouth students have a long tradition of suing the Secretary of State. And it's been the same Secretary of State this whole time, basically. My view is that college students are, and rightfully are, members of the state's political community. There's a statute that makes that the case. COVID-19 makes it a little bit different because the definition of domicile requires that you've established a physical presence. So I'll just let Kelsey answer from their perspective beyond that.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, this is one of those conversations where I feel like people sort of gloss over when you use the D word, like what is a domicile? And it just, I don't know, gets overwhelming. I mean.
Important question.
Answer.
Does domicile always have an E at the end?
Domiciliary doesn't.
Right. Well, sometimes they used to spell domicile without an E.
Really?
Yeah, D-O-M-I-C-I-L, like back in the day.
Did you guys know that Henry is also a Wikipedia expert? If you want to know, like, you know, where some random spice was invented, the guy knows.
Can I just clarify, for purposes of somebody, so there are the issues around, you know, students who want to vote in New Hampshire who are from out of, you know, who came to school from out of state. In this instance, we have a question about somebody who grew up here in New Hampshire, is now in school out of state. She doesn't surrender her domicile for voting purposes by virtue of going to school in another state. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, so we're not going to talk about like a specific person, but I wanted to just sort of take a step back when we're talking about this. And like, you know, you establish your domicile when you're physically in a place and that place is your home. You know, some people can choose their domicile, right? If you have two places that are your home and are the center of, you know, much of your sort of life, you get to choose which place is the center of your civic life.
Yes. And also like domicile is defined differently in different states. And so it's like kind of, I don't know what the law is in New York, but I will say it's like in New Hampshire, it requires two things. It requires that you live here, you have a physical presence, and that it's basically your home for civic engagement. It's where your people are, it's where you want to be involved. That's domicile.
So if I'm a high school kid and I grew up in New Hampshire and I've always gone to the primary and I love voting here and it's like the place where I've always participated, if I go to New York, so long as I don't establish a new domicile in New York, if my absence is temporary and this remains my home, I can continue to vote here, right? Because I've established it and I'm only gone temporarily. I keep my domicile until I create a new one. And under this definition, you create a new one when you have basically gone somewhere where you intend to stay and have made it the center of your home. What Henry's referencing is every state has it a little bit differently. But basically it's like, if you're only gone temporarily, as we have in our FAQs, you absolutely maintain your domicile here. So, you know, along the same lines, you could have a kid who grew up in New York and, you know, say they were interested and active in New York politics growing up, but then they come here and they go to UNH and they love UNH and this is, you know, their new community and they want to be part of voting here and this is their new civic home. They absolutely can be domiciled here, right? It's a manifestation. It's that decision saying, this is my home that sort of puts you over the edge. The same kid could say, you know, I still feel more linked civically to New York and make that decision. Because in a lot of ways, domicile is a state of mind. But the kid who has decided, this is my spot, like this is where I want to be, I'm a UNH kid. And like, if I've moved onto campus and I've already, you know, I've established my physical presence, I've like been here, this is my home, this is my community, this is what I care about for these civic purposes, then this still can be my civic home, even if I'm temporarily now back in my parents' basement in New York, right? If it's a temporary absence, so long as you've established your domicile here, you remain domiciled here.
Great. Well, as always, great answers. And you know, there are complexities when it comes to any one individual, as you say. You know, there are kind of the generals. And again, always feel free to call the hotline and get more specific information on anything. We are so lucky to have Henry and Kelsey here in New Hampshire doing this work. We are all better off for it, and we're so appreciative. And we're grateful for the ways that Kent Street is able to work with both the ACLU and with the Voter Protection Program. But we really thank you for coming tonight, and we're looking forward to continuing your work here on out. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank
you all.
Okay, see ya. You're welcome to stay, but don't feel you have to. Actually, Henry, you're not welcome to stay because we're going into a strategy discussion.
Later.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody.
And I'm about to turn off the recording, right?
Yes, so we'll,
Okay.
yeah.
Will do.